Daily life in the Achaemenid Persian Empire followed patterns shaped by vast distances and diverse peoples. The empire, which reached its height under rulers like Cyrus the Great and Darius I during the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, stretched from the Mediterranean to India, encompassing a remarkable variety of cultures, languages, and environments. Most people in the empire lived as farmers, craftspeople, or merchants who continued their traditional ways of life under Persian administration, paying taxes and providing labor while maintaining their local customs and beliefs. The routines of daily life reflected both the practical demands of living in various climates and landscapes and the administrative systems that organized this enormous territory into a functioning political unit. The physical environment across the empire varied dramatically, from the arid plateaus of Persia itself to the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, the Mediterranean coastlands, and the oases of Central Asia. The Persian heartland consisted largely of high plateau surrounded by mountain ranges, with limited rainfall and extreme temperature variations between hot summers and cold winters. The landscape appeared brown and dusty for much of the year, with vegetation concentrated along streams and in areas where irrigation made agriculture possible. The air in the plateau regions felt dry and carried the scent of dust, sage, and other drought-resistant plants, while the quality of light at this elevation gave distant mountains and other features exceptional clarity. Houses in Persian plateau reflected the climate and available materials, with most dwellings constructed from mud brick that provided good insulation against both heat and cold. The typical house was built around a central courtyard, with rooms opening to this interior space rather than facing outward to the street. This design provided privacy while allowing air circulation and creating a protected outdoor area where much domestic activity occurred. The walls were thick, sometimes several feet deep, creating interiors that remained cool during summer heat and retained warmth in winter. The flat roofs, accessed by internal stairs, provided additional living and sleeping space during hot weather when families sought relief from accumulated indoor heat. The interiors of Persian homes remained relatively dark due to small windows designed to keep out the intense sun while allowing some ventilation. The windows that existed were often covered with wooden lattices that created patterns of light and shadow while maintaining privacy. The floors might be bare earth in modest homes or covered with carpets and rugs in wealthier households, these textiles representing one of the characteristic features of Persian material culture. The walls were plastered and sometimes painted or decorated with carved designs, while niches built into the walls provided storage space and display areas for valued possessions. The overall atmosphere inside Persian homes combined coolness, dimness, and the subtle fragrance of materials and furnishings specific to the region. The furnishings in Persian households varied according to wealth and status, but even modest homes contained certain basic items. Low platforms or cushions served for sitting, as Persian tradition favored floor seating rather than chairs. Small tables or trays were brought out for meals and removed afterward, maintaining the flexible use of space. Storage chests held clothing and other possessions, while various vessels made from pottery, metal, or glass contained food, water, and other materials. Wealthy households owned elaborate furnishings, including fine carpets, decorated cushions, metalwork vessels, and other luxury items that displayed their owner's status and taste. The daily routine in Persian settlements began early, particularly during the hot summer months when work needed to be completed before the midday heat became overwhelming. People rose from their sleeping arrangements and began the day's activities, with household members performing various tasks according to their roles and responsibilities. The morning air felt relatively cool, offering a brief period of comfort before the sun climbed higher and the temperature rose. The sounds of morning included the calls of roosters, the voices of people beginning their work, and the various noises of a community awakening to another day. The smell of bread baking in clay ovens mixed with other cooking odors and the general scent of human habitation in the dry air. Breakfast consisted of simple food, typically including bread made from wheat or barley, perhaps with cheese, dates, or yogurt. Tea had not yet reached Persia from the east, so people drank water or light wines with their meals. The bread was flat and somewhat similar to modern pita or lavash, baked in clay ovens heated by fire, with the dough pressed against the hot interior walls where it cooked quickly. The skill required to bake this bread properly, managing the oven temperature and timing the baking, represented knowledge passed from mothers to daughters through generations of practice. Agriculture formed the foundation of the Persian economy, with irrigation playing a crucial role in areas where rainfall was insufficient for reliable crop production. The qanat system, an ingenious method of underground water channels that tapped into aquifers in the mountains and transported water by gravity to agricultural areas and settlements, represented one of the great achievements of Persian engineering. These qanats, some extending for miles underground, required significant investment to construct and constant maintenance to keep them functioning, but they made agriculture possible in regions that would otherwise support only sparse vegetation. The sound of water flowing through irrigation channels and the sight of green fields in otherwise arid landscapes marked the success of this technology. The Persian Empire's vast road network, maintained to facilitate military movements and administrative communication, also supported trade and the movement of people throughout the territory. The Royal Road, stretching from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, represented the most famous of these routes, with way stations at regular intervals providing shelter and fresh horses for official couriers who could traverse the entire distance in about a week. Ordinary travelers moved more slowly, taking weeks or months to cover similar distances, but the maintained roads and waypoints made long-distance travel possible in ways that had not existed before the Persian imperial system developed. Markets in Persian cities and towns provided venues where people exchanged goods and engaged in the commercial activity essential to urban life. These markets offered products from throughout the empire and beyond, with merchants bringing luxury goods from distant regions along with local agricultural products and craft items. The variety of goods available reflected the empire's geographic extent, with spices from the east, textiles from various regions, metalwork from skilled craftspeople, and food products from agricultural areas, all being bought and sold. The sound and atmosphere of these markets combined the calls of vendors, the voices of bargaining customers, and the general bustle of commercial activity in spaces that served social functions as well as economic ones. Social hierarchy in Persian Empire created distinctions between the Persian elite who controlled the government and military, the populations of subject peoples who maintained their traditional social structures under Persian oversight, and slaves who performed various forms of labor throughout the society. The Persian aristocracy owned large estates worked by dependent laborers, maintained elaborate households, and participated in the administration of the empire through various offices and positions. These nobles dressed in distinctive clothing that displayed their status, including the characteristic Persian trousers and tunics, quite different from the draped garments common in Greek and other Mediterranean cultures. Women in Persian society occupied various positions depending on their social class and family circumstances. Elite women could own property, engage in business, and exercise significant influence within their families and sometimes in broader political contexts, though their activities were generally constrained by expectations about proper behavior and limited public roles. Women from common families worked alongside men in agricultural and craft production, managing households, and participating in economic activities necessary for family survival. The specific tasks women performed varied by region and local custom, as the empire's diversity meant that no single pattern of women's roles applied throughout the entire territory. Religious practices in Persian Empire reflected the diverse beliefs of its many peoples, with Zoroastrianism representing the religion of the Persian elite, while subject populations continued worshipping their traditional deities. Zoroastrianism emphasized the cosmic struggle between good and evil, with adherents expected to support the good through proper thoughts, words, and deeds. Fire temples, where sacred flames were maintained continuously, served as religious centers, and fire itself held special significance as a symbol of purity and divine presence. The priests who maintained these temples and performed ceremonies formed a distinct social class with their own knowledge, practices, and responsibilities. The afternoon hours in Persian settlements saw reduced activity as the heat reached its maximum intensity, particularly during summer months when temperatures could become dangerously high. People sought shade and limited their physical exertion during these hours, waiting for the temperature to moderate before resuming work. Inside homes, the thick walls and limited windows provided some relief from the external heat, creating relatively cool spaces where people could rest. The sounds of the afternoon included the buzz of insects, the occasional call of birds, and the general quiet of a community avoiding the worst of the day's heat. Craftsmanship flourished in Persian cities, with skilled workers producing the various goods necessary for daily life and the luxury items demanded by elite consumers. Metalworkers created vessels, weapons, jewelry, and decorative items from gold, silver, bronze, and iron, their workshops filled with the sound of hammering and the smell of hot metal. Textile production occurred in many households, with women spinning wool or flax and weaving cloth on looms, though specialized weavers also produced fine textiles, including the carpets for which Persian craftspeople became renowned. The making of these carpets required considerable skill and time, with complex patterns being created through the tying of individual knots and the cutting and shaping of the pile. Later in the afternoon, as shadows lengthened and the air began to cool, activities resumed throughout the settlement. This period marked the time for completing essential daily tasks, preparing the evening meal, and engaging in whatever social or recreational activities the evening might bring. The quality of light changed as the sun descended, becoming warmer and softer, giving the brown landscape and mud brick buildings a golden glow. The sounds of late afternoon included the voices of people returning to activity, the calls of vendors offering last goods of the day, and the various noises of a community transitioning from the forced inactivity of the hot hours to the more comfortable evening period. The main meal of the day occurred in the evening when families gathered to share food and conversation. For most Persians, this meal consisted of bread as the foundation, accompanied by various dishes that might include rice, vegetables, legumes, and, when available, meat. The cooking methods included boiling, baking, and grilling, with various herbs and spices adding flavor to dishes. The Persian diet incorporated influences from throughout the empire, with recipes and ingredients from different regions blending into the distinctive cuisine that would influence cooking throughout the region for centuries to come. The meal was eaten while seated on the floor or on low platforms, with food served in communal dishes from which diners helped themselves. Wine drinking accompanied meals in many households, as wine production was well established in suitable regions of the empire and formed an important part of agricultural production. The wine was typically mixed with water according to custom, with pure wine considered barbaric and potentially dangerous in its effects. The vessels used for serving and drinking wine ranged from simple pottery in common households to elaborate metal vessels decorated with reliefs and precious materials in elite contexts. The consumption of wine occurred within social frameworks that regulated when, where, and how much was appropriate, reflecting broader cultural values about moderation and proper behavior. Evening hours after the meal brought opportunities for leisure and social interaction, with people gathering in courtyards or other communal spaces to talk, listen to music, or engage in various activities. Storytelling represented an important form of entertainment, with professional storytellers recounting tales of heroes, historical events, and moral lessons. These oral traditions preserved cultural knowledge and provided entertainment in societies where literacy remained limited to specialized scribes and administrative personnel. The telling of stories created social bonds and passed time during the long evenings when darkness made most outdoor activities impractical. Music held an important place in Persian culture, with various instruments, including stringed instruments similar to later lutes, drums, and wind instruments, being played at celebrations and other social gatherings. The melodies and rhythms of Persian music created distinctive soundscapes that varied by region but shared certain characteristics that marked them as part of a broader musical tradition. Professional musicians performed at elite gatherings and religious ceremonies, while ordinary people made their own music using simpler instruments or simply through singing. As darkness fell over Persian settlements, the absence of public lighting meant that most activity ceased and people remained in their homes or immediate neighborhoods. Oil lamps provided illumination when needed, typically burning sesame or other vegetable oils through wicks that produced small flames giving off limited light. The warm glow of these lamps created intimate atmospheres in interior spaces, their flickering light casting shadows and creating conditions where conversation and quiet activities could continue, but detailed work became difficult. The smell of burning oil mixed with other household odors to create the characteristic scent of evening in Persian homes. The night brought significantly cooler temperatures, particularly on the high plateau, where the lack of moisture in the air allowed rapid heat loss after sunset. People prepared for sleep by arranging bedding, which might consist of mattresses filled with cotton or other materials in wealthier homes, or simple mats in poorer households, all covered by blankets or quilts as needed for warmth. The sleeping arrangements varied by season, with families sometimes sleeping on roofs during hot weather to catch any cooling breeze, while winter nights required indoor sleeping with adequate covering against the cold. The sky at night displayed the stars with exceptional clarity in the dry air and high elevation of the Persian plateau.
These celestial displays held both practical and religious significance, with the movements of stars and planets being observed and recorded by astronomers who maintained knowledge of celestial patterns and their meanings. The night sounds in Persian settlements included the occasional call of night watchmen, the bark of dogs, and the various small noises of a community at rest. The general quiet of the night contrasted sharply with the activity of daytime hours, creating a rhythm of busy days and peaceful nights that structured human existence. Sleep eventually came to most people as the night deepened, their bodies tired from the day's activities and ready for rest. Dreams during these sleeping hours might be remembered and discussed, as dreams were sometimes interpreted as messages from divine sources or as reflections of a person's spiritual state. The cycle of waking and sleeping, like the cycle of seasons and the rhythm of agricultural work, represented one of the fundamental patterns that structured life in the Persian Empire. This simple, steady pattern of daily existence in the Achaemenid Persian Empire was an ordinary reality for the people who called this vast territory their home.
Daily life in Byzantine Constantinople unfolded within walls that had stood for centuries. The city, founded as the new Roman capital by Constantine the Great in 330 CE and surviving until 1453, served as the political, economic, and religious center of the Byzantine Empire. Most residents lived in a densely populated urban environment, quite different from the rural settlements where the majority of the empire's population resided. The routines of daily life in Constantinople reflected both the continuation of Roman traditions and the development of distinctively Byzantine characteristics, particularly the central role of Orthodox Christianity in shaping culture, society, and individual behavior. The physical setting of Constantinople provided natural advantages that contributed to its importance and longevity. The city occupied a peninsula at the junction of Europe and Asia, surrounded on three sides by water, with the Golden Horn Inlet forming a natural harbor on the north and the Sea of Marmara bordering the south. Massive walls protected the landward side, creating a fortified space that could withstand siege while maintaining access to the sea. The climate brought hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters, with seasonal winds affecting both comfort and economic activity. The air carried the salt smell of the sea mixed with the various urban odors of a large city, while the quality of light reflecting off water created distinctive atmospheric conditions. Houses in Constantinople varied considerably depending on the residents' social and economic status, from the mansions of the wealthy to the cramped tenements where the urban poor lived in conditions that fostered disease and social problems. The typical house for a moderately prosperous family consisted of a multi-story structure built around a central courtyard with stone or brick walls supporting wooden floors and a tiled roof. The ground floor often included shops or workshops that opened onto the street, generating income while the family lived in the upper stories. Windows were small and covered with wooden shutters or translucent materials, as glass remained expensive enough that only the wealthy could afford glass windows of any significant size. The interiors of Byzantine homes reflected both functional necessities and cultural values that emphasized religious devotion and connection to the Roman past. The main living areas included a central room where the family gathered, with built-in benches along the walls and a brazier or small fireplace providing heat during cold months. Religious icons occupied prominent positions, with household shrines dedicated to Christ, the Virgin Mary, and various saints receiving daily attention through prayers and the lighting of candles or oil lamps. The walls might be plastered and painted with geometric patterns or religious imagery, while the floors consisted of stone or tile, sometimes featuring mosaic decoration in wealthier homes. The furnishings in Byzantine households combined Roman traditions with later developments, including low couches for reclining during meals in the old Roman fashion, though sitting in chairs became increasingly common over the centuries. Tables, chests for storage, and various vessels for food and drink completed the basic furnishings, with wealthier families owning more elaborate pieces, including ivory inlaid furniture, silver vessels, and fine textiles. The overall impression inside Byzantine homes mixed functionality with displays of religious devotion and whatever level of luxury the family could afford, creating domestic spaces that reflected both practical needs and cultural values. The daily routine in Constantinople began early, with the city awakening to the sounds of church bells calling the faithful to morning prayers. The emperor and the aristocracy attended elaborate services in the great churches, while ordinary people said their prayers at home or attended services in neighborhood churches. The morning air along the waterfront carried the smell of the sea and fish, while in other districts the odors of baking bread, cooking, and human habitation created the characteristic scent of urban life. The sounds of morning included not only church bells, but also the calls of street vendors, the voices of people beginning their work, and the general noise of a densely populated city coming to life. Breakfast in Byzantine Constantinople consisted of simple food for most residents, typically including bread dipped in wine or water, perhaps with cheese or olives. The bread was usually made from wheat flour, though poorer people ate bread made from barley or other less expensive grains. The monasteries and charitable institutions operated by the church provided bread to the poor, maintaining a tradition of feeding the hungry that helped prevent starvation among the most destitute, while also fulfilling religious obligations to perform acts of charity. The smell of bread baking in commercial bakeries filled certain streets, as most families purchased bread rather than baking it at home due to the lack of adequate ovens in individual dwellings. Commerce formed the economic foundation of Constantinople, with the city serving as a major center of trade between East and West. The markets and shops offered goods from throughout the known world, with silk from China, spices from India, furs from the north, grain from Egypt, and countless other products being bought and sold. The government regulated trade through guilds that controlled various crafts and trades, determining who could practice each profession, setting quality standards, and managing competition. These guilds also served social and religious functions, organizing members for mutual support and maintaining chapels dedicated to patron saints who protected the particular trade. The production of silk represented one of Constantinople's most important industries, with the secrets of sericulture having been brought from China centuries earlier and carefully guarded to maintain the Byzantine monopoly on this luxury fabric within the Mediterranean world. Women worked in workshops processing raw silk, spinning it into thread, and weaving it into cloth, while other workers dyed the fabric using expensive pigments, including the famous Tyrian purple made from sea snails. The sound of looms and the smell of dyes created the sensory landscape of textile districts, while the finished silks displayed in merchants' shops showcased the wealth and artistic achievement that characterized Byzantine material culture. Religion permeated all aspects of Byzantine life, with Orthodox Christianity providing not only spiritual guidance, but also the framework for understanding the world and one's place within it. The calendar was structured around religious festivals and saints' days, with these occasions bringing breaks from ordinary work routines and opportunities for celebration, processions, and special services.
the great church of Hagia Sophia, with its massive dome seeming to float above the interior space, served as the empire's religious center, where the patriarch conducted services and the emperor participated in ceremonies that demonstrated the sacred nature of imperial authority.
The religious services in Byzantine churches followed elaborate liturgies that had developed over centuries, combining prayers, scripture readings, hymns, and the celebration of the Eucharist in ceremonies that could last several hours. The interior of churches glowed with the light of countless candles and oil lamps, their flames reflecting off golden mosaics and creating an atmosphere intended to provide a glimpse of heaven. The smell of incense filled these spaces, the aromatic smoke rising toward the domes, while clergy in ornate vestments performed rituals that connected worshippers to the divine realm and to the long tradition of Christian worship stretching back to the apostles. Women in Byzantine society occupied various positions depending on their social class, with elite women sometimes exercising significant influence through family connections and wealth, while poor women worked in various trades or as servants. Empresses and women of the imperial family could wield considerable power, with some ruling as regents for underage emperors or even ruling in their own right in exceptional circumstances. Women from merchant and artisan families participated in family businesses, managing shops or workshops alongside or in the absence of male relatives. The expectation remained that women should focus on domestic responsibilities and maintain modest behavior, but the practical realities of urban life meant that many women worked outside the home and participated in the economic life of the city. Children in Byzantine families received varying levels of education depending on social class and gender. Boys from wealthy families studied classical Greek literature, rhetoric, mathematics, and other subjects that prepared them for careers in government, the church, or learned professions. Girls from elite families sometimes received education in reading and religious texts, though their schooling focused more on preparing them for managing households and raising children. Children from working families learned trades through apprenticeship, beginning to work alongside parents or masters from relatively young ages and gradually acquiring the skills they would need to support themselves as adults. The afternoon hours in Constantinople saw continued commercial and administrative activity, though the pace might slow during the hottest summer days when the sun's intensity made sustained work uncomfortable. The narrow streets and multi-story buildings provided some shade, creating relatively comfortable conditions for movement through the city. The harbors remained busy with ships arriving and departing, their cargoes being loaded and unloaded by dock workers whose labor kept the commerce flowing. The sounds of the afternoon included the calls of vendors, the voices of people conducting business, and the constant background noise of a large urban population engaged in countless individual activities. The public baths represented important institutions in Byzantine urban life, continuing a Roman tradition while adapting it to Christian sensibilities. These establishments provided facilities for washing and socializing, with separate facilities or separate hours for men and women. The bathing sequence involved moving through rooms of different temperatures, from warm to hot and then to cool, with the hot rooms heated by furnaces that sent warm air through hollow spaces under the floors and in the walls. The atmosphere in the baths combined dampness, heat, and the particular smell of heated stone and bodies, while the sound of water and voices echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Charitable activities represented important expressions of religious devotion, with the church operating hospitals, orphanages, hostels for travelers, and other institutions that served the poor and sick. These establishments, funded by wealthy donors seeking spiritual merit and staffed by clergy and dedicated laypeople, provided services that the government did not offer. The hospitals treated the sick using medical knowledge inherited from ancient Greek physicians and supplemented by practical experience, though the treatments available remained limited by contemporary understanding of disease and human physiology. The care provided in these institutions, while basic by modern standards, represented genuine attempts to alleviate suffering and fulfill Christian obligations to help those in need. Later in the afternoon, as the day's main work drew toward completion, people began preparing for the evening. Shops remained open, allowing final purchases of food and other necessities. Women who had been working returned home to prepare the main meal, while men concluded their business for the day. The quality of light changed as the sun descended toward the west, creating dramatic effects as it illuminated the domes and towers of churches and reflected off the water surrounding the city. The sounds of late afternoon included church bells marking the hours for prayer, the voices of family members calling to each other, and the general transition from work to rest. The main meal of the day occurred in the evening, when families gathered to share food and conversation. For most Byzantine families, this meal consisted of bread as the foundation, accompanied by various dishes that might include vegetables, legumes, fish, and occasionally meat. The Byzantine diet incorporated influences from both the Greek and Roman traditions, with olive oil, wine, and wheat bread forming staples, while the Church's fasting requirements, which prohibited meat and dairy products on many days throughout the year, shaped eating patterns and encouraged the development of meatless dishes that became characteristic of Byzantine cuisine. Wine drinking accompanied meals in most households, continuing the ancient Mediterranean tradition of consuming wine as a standard beverage. The wine was typically mixed with water and flavored with various herbs or spices, creating drinks that varied considerably in taste and quality. The government controlled wine production and distribution through regulations and taxes, ensuring a steady supply while generating revenue for imperial coffers. The consumption of wine occurred within social frameworks that emphasized moderation, with drunkenness considered shameful and contrary to Christian virtue. Evening hours after the meal brought opportunities for leisure and social interaction, though the limited artificial lighting meant that most activities ceased with sunset. Wealthy households might host gatherings where guests engaged in conversation, listened to music, or discussed literature and philosophy, continuing intellectual traditions inherited from the classical world. Ordinary families spent evening hours in quieter pursuits, perhaps telling stories, mending clothes, or engaging in simple crafts by the light of oil lamps. Children played quiet games or listened to adult conversation before being sent to bed, their days structured by routines that prepared them for adult responsibilities.
Storytelling preserved cultural knowledge and provided entertainment, with professional storytellers recounting tales from the Bible, lives of saints, historical events, and adventures that mixed fact and legend. These oral traditions supplemented written texts, making cultural knowledge accessible to the illiterate while providing entertainment that brought communities together. The stories often carried moral lessons, reinforcing religious values and social norms, while also offering glimpses of distant lands and extraordinary events that sparked imagination and wonder. As darkness fell over Constantinople, the city transformed into a very different place, with most legitimate activity ceasing and only the night watch, criminals, and those with urgent business moving through the dark streets. The government employed night watchmen to patrol the streets, carrying torches and calling out the hours while watching for fires or criminal activity. These patrols provided some security, though the dark, narrow streets remained dangerous for those who had to travel at night. Most people remained in their homes, the doors barred and shutters closed against both the darkness and potential dangers it concealed. Inside homes, oil lamps provided limited illumination, their small flames creating pools of light surrounded by shadows. The smell of burning olive oil mixed with other household odors, while the flickering light created an intimate atmosphere quite different from the bright exposure of daylight. Families prepared for sleep by spreading mattresses or mats on the floor or on raised platforms, covering themselves with woolen blankets or quilts depending on the season. The sleeping arrangements varied by household size and wealth, with some families sleeping in separate rooms while others shared common sleeping spaces. The night brought cooler temperatures, particularly welcome after hot summer days, but requiring adequate bedding during winter months when cold rain or occasional snow made conditions uncomfortable. The sounds of the night included the calls of night watchmen, the occasional bark of dogs, and the various small noises of a city at rest. The darkness emphasized the isolation of individual households, each family unit contained within its own walls, while the larger city existed as an invisible presence beyond the immediate sensory range. Sleep eventually came to most residents of Constantinople as the night deepened, their bodies tired from the day's activities and ready for rest. Dreams during these sleeping hours might be interpreted as messages from God or saints, communications that required attention, and sometimes consultation with priests or spiritual advisors. The cycle of waking and sleeping, like the cycle of religious observances and the rhythm of commercial activity, represented one of the fundamental patterns that structured existence in Byzantine Constantinople. This simple, steady pattern of daily life in the great city that straddled Europe and Asia was an ordinary reality for the people who called Constantinople their home.
Daily life in Ottoman Istanbul followed rhythms shaped by Islamic tradition and cosmopolitan diversity. The city, conquered by Mehmed II in 1453 and transformed into the capital of the Ottoman Empire, had become by the 17th century one of the world's largest and most prosperous urban centers. The population included Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and many other ethnic and religious groups, creating a multicultural environment where different communities lived in distinct quarters while participating in the shared economic and social life of the imperial capital. The routines of daily life reflected both Islamic religious practices and the administrative structures of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. The physical setting of Istanbul retained the natural advantages that had made Constantinople important, with the city occupying the same strategic position at the junction of Europe and Asia. The Bosphorus Strait connected the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara, creating a waterway of enormous commercial and military significance. The Golden Horn Inlet provided a protected harbor where ships from throughout the Mediterranean and beyond anchored and conducted business. The climate brought hot, humid summers and cool, rainy winters, with the water surrounding the city moderating temperature extremes while creating distinctive atmospheric conditions where mist and fog were common.
The air carried the salt smell of the sea, mixed with the various urban odors of a large city, including the distinctive scent of coal and charcoal smoke from countless fires. Houses in Ottoman Istanbul varied considerably depending on the residents' wealth and status, from the mansions of the elite to the modest dwellings of craftspeople and laborers. The typical house for a moderately prosperous family consisted of a wooden structure built around a central courtyard, with the first floor often featuring an overhanging upper story that created covered spaces at street level. The walls were made from a wooden frame filled with brick or plaster, while the exterior was covered with wood planking or plaster that might be painted in various colors. The roofs were typically covered with red tiles, creating the characteristic appearance of Ottoman residential architecture. Windows featured wooden lattices that allowed air circulation while maintaining privacy, particularly important for the women's quarters, where female family members spent much of their time. The interior of Ottoman homes reflected Islamic cultural values and aesthetic preferences, with separate areas designated for men and women. The selamlik, or men's quarters, occupied the ground floor and included a reception room where male guests were entertained, keeping visitors separated from the private family spaces. The harem, or women's quarters, occupied the upper floors and included living areas, sleeping chambers, and spaces for domestic work. The rooms were sparsely furnished compared to European standards, with built-in divans along the walls providing seating and sleeping surfaces covered with cushions and textiles. The floors were covered with carpets and rugs, while the walls might be painted or decorated with carved woodwork and ceramic tiles, featuring geometric and floral patterns that reflected Islamic artistic traditions prohibiting figural representation. The furnishings in Ottoman homes emphasized comfort and flexibility, with low tables and cushions rather than chairs and high tables. Coffee service sets, including elaborate copper or brass trays, pots, and small cups without handles, represented important household items that reflected the central role of coffee drinking in Ottoman social life. Storage occurred in built-in cupboards and chests, with clothing and bedding kept folded rather than hung. The overall impression inside Ottoman homes combined elegance with simplicity, functional spaces enhanced by beautiful textiles, carpets, and decorative elements that displayed the family's taste and wealth.
The daily routine in Istanbul began before dawn with the call to prayer from the city's numerous mosques, the voices of muezzins calling the faithful to perform the first of the 5 daily prayers required of observant Muslims. The adhan, chanted from minarets throughout the city, created a layered soundscape as different mosques began their calls at slightly different times, the Arabic words echoing across neighborhoods and reminding everyone of religious obligations. Men who attended mosque for dawn prayer would rise, perform ritual ablutions, and make their way through the dark streets to the nearest mosque, while others prayed at home before beginning the day's activities. Breakfast in Ottoman households consisted of simple but satisfying food, typically including bread, cheese, olives, honey, and perhaps eggs. The bread was fresh from the bakery, as most families purchased bread daily rather than baking at home. Yogurt appeared frequently, continuing a dietary tradition that extended back through Turkish history. The meal was consumed while sitting on cushions around a low table or on the floor itself, with food served on metal or ceramic plates and eaten using bread to scoop up other items, or increasingly by this period, using spoons. Coffee had not yet become the universal Turkish beverage it would later become, so water or sherbet, a sweetened fruit drink, accompanied the morning meal. Coffee drinking represented one of the most characteristic features of Ottoman social life, with coffee houses serving as important gathering places where men spent hours in conversation, playing games, smoking tobacco, and conducting informal business. The coffee itself was prepared in a distinctive way, with finely ground beans boiled with sugar in small pots called zezve, creating a strong, thick brew served in small cups. The ritual of coffee preparation and consumption became an art form, with proper technique and service reflecting refinement and hospitality. The smell of coffee and tobacco smoke filled the coffee houses, while the sounds included the clatter of backgammon pieces, the murmur of conversation, and occasional music from performers entertaining the clientele. Commerce and craft production formed the economic foundation of Istanbul, with the city's numerous markets and workshops producing and distributing goods throughout the empire and beyond. The covered markets, particularly the Grand Bazaar, housed thousands of shops organized by trade, with entire sections dedicated to specific goods such as jewelry, textiles, spices, or metal work. The government regulated trade through guilds that controlled entry into professions, set prices and quality standards, and maintained order within the commercial districts. These guilds also served social and religious functions, organizing members for mutual support and maintaining fountains and other public works as charitable contributions. The production of textiles represented one of Istanbul's most important industries, with workshops producing silk and cotton fabrics, carpets, and various other textile products. Women worked in homes spinning thread and doing various forms of needlework, while male weavers operated looms in workshops producing cloth for sale. The dyeing of fabrics created distinctive districts where the smell of dyes and the sight of colored fabrics drying created characteristic sensory landscapes. The finished textiles ranged from simple cottons for ordinary use to elaborate silks and velvets embroidered with gold and silver thread for elite consumption.
Religious observance structured time in Ottoman Istanbul, with the 5 daily prayers marking the passage of hours and the weekly Friday prayer requiring attendance at mosque by adult men. The mosques themselves represented architectural achievements that dominated the city's skyline, with massive domes and tall minarets creating a distinctive urban silhouette. The interior of mosques featured large open spaces covered by domes, with the floor covered by carpets where worshippers prayed facing toward Mecca. The walls were decorated with ceramic tiles and calligraphic inscriptions of Quranic verses, while oil lamps and candles provided illumination during evening prayers. The atmosphere during prayer services combined the recitation of Arabic prayers, the smell of worshippers' bodies and the soap used in ablutions, and the general sense of collective devotion. Public baths, or hammams, served important social and hygienic functions in Ottoman society, providing facilities for the ritual cleansing required before prayer, while also serving as gathering places for socializing. The baths operated on a similar principle to Roman baths, with a sequence of rooms of increasing temperature leading to a hot room where bathers washed using soap and water before moving to cooler areas. Separate facilities or separate hours accommodated men and women, with women's bath days becoming important social occasions where women could gather away from male oversight. The atmosphere in the hammams combined heat, humidity, the smell of soap and wet stone, and the sounds of water and conversation echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Women in Ottoman society lived lives largely separated from public view, spending most of their time in domestic spaces or in gender-segregated contexts like the baths or visits to other women's quarters. The practice of veiling and seclusion varied by social class and specific circumstances, with elite women maintaining stricter seclusion, while women from working families moved more freely in public as economic necessity required. Women managed households, raised children, and in many cases participated in economic activities such as textile production or operating small businesses from their homes. The harem in elite households could include multiple women, including wives, concubines, children, and female servants, creating complex social environments with their own hierarchies and politics. Children in Ottoman families received varying levels of education depending on gender and social class. Boys from elite families studied at special schools where they learned to read and write Arabic and Ottoman Turkish, studied the Quran and Islamic law, and received instruction in literature, mathematics, and other subjects that prepared them for positions in government or religious institutions. Girls typically received education at home, learning domestic skills and basic religious knowledge from their mothers and other female relatives. Children from working families learned trades through apprenticeship, beginning to work alongside parents or masters from relatively young ages. The afternoon hours in Istanbul saw continued commercial activity, though the pace might slow during the hottest summer days when the intense heat and humidity made sustained exertion uncomfortable. The narrow streets provided some shade, while many buildings featured overhanging upper stories that created covered walkways at ground level. The sounds of the afternoon included the calls of street vendors offering various goods and services, the voices of shopkeepers and customers conducting business, and the general noise of urban life. Water sellers moved through the streets carrying ornate containers and calling out their service, providing refreshment to those who could afford the small cost.
Charitable foundations, or wakfs, played an important role in Ottoman society, providing social services that ranged from feeding the poor to maintaining fountains, bridges, and other infrastructure. These foundations were typically established by wealthy individuals who donated property or money to support specific purposes in perpetuity, gaining religious merit while also perpetuating their names and ensuring their memory. The food kitchens associated with major mosques distributed soup and bread to the poor daily, while hospitals treated the sick and schools provided education to students regardless of ability to pay. The existence of these charitable institutions reflected Islamic values, emphasizing social responsibility and care for the vulnerable. Later in the afternoon, as the time for the afternoon prayer approached, activity in the markets and workshops diminished as people prepared to fulfill their religious obligations. The call to prayer rang out again from the minarets, and observant men made their way to mosques while women prayed at home. The rhythm of prayer times structured the day, creating natural breaks in activity and reminding everyone of the religious framework within which daily life occurred. After prayers, activity resumed, though the day was gradually winding toward evening and the approaching time of the main meal. The main meal of the day typically occurred after the evening prayer, when families gathered to share food and conversation. Ottoman cuisine reflected the empire's geographic extent and cultural diversity, incorporating ingredients and cooking techniques from Turkish, Arab, Persian, and other traditions. A typical meal might include rice pilaf, various vegetable dishes, meat preparations such as kebabs or stews, yogurt and bread,
all served together on a large tray called a sofra, placed on a low table or on the floor. The food was eaten using bread to scoop up other dishes or with spoons, while forks remained uncommon. The consumption of food occurred within Islamic dietary restrictions, with pork forbidden and meat required to be slaughtered according to halal procedures. Sherbet, sweetened fruit drinks cooled with snow or ice brought from nearby mountains and stored in special ice houses, provided refreshment during meals, particularly in hot weather. The variety of sherbet flavors included rose, lemon, cherry, and various other fruits, creating colorful and flavorful drinks that represented one of the pleasures of Ottoman dining. The service and consumption of sherbet followed certain etiquette, with the drinks served in special glasses and consumed slowly to fully appreciate their flavor. Evening hours after the meal brought opportunities for leisure and social interaction, with family members gathering in the main living areas. Men might visit coffee houses or the homes of friends, while women entertained other women or spent time with their children. Storytelling represented an important form of entertainment, with professional storytellers recounting tales from Islamic tradition, historical events, and adventures that captured imagination and provided moral lessons. Shadow puppet theater, called karagöz after its main character, provided another form of entertainment, with skillfully manipulated puppets creating comic scenes that commented on social issues while making audiences laugh.
Music held an important place in Ottoman culture, with various instruments, including stringed instruments like the oud, wind instruments like the ney flute, and various drums being played at celebrations and other social gatherings. Ottoman classical music followed complex modal and rhythmic systems that had developed over centuries, creating sophisticated compositions performed by trained musicians. Popular music existed alongside the classical tradition, with simpler songs and melodies being sung and played by ordinary people. The sound of music drifting from houses or coffee houses added to the sonic landscape of evening in Ottoman neighborhoods. As darkness fell over Istanbul, the city transformed as public spaces emptied and people retreated to their homes. The night watch patrolled the streets, carrying lanterns and watching for fires or criminal activity while calling out the hours. The government imposed curfews during certain periods, restricting movement after dark to maintain order and security. Most legitimate activity ceased with nightfall, as the lack of effective street lighting made movement difficult and dangerous. Inside homes, oil lamps and candles provided illumination, their flickering light creating intimate atmospheres where family members engaged in quiet activities before preparing for sleep. The night brought cooler temperatures and increased humidity, particularly welcome after hot summer days, but requiring adequate bedding during winter months. Sleeping arrangements consisted of mattresses and quilts that were stored in cupboards during the day and spread on the floor at night, creating flexible living spaces that served multiple purposes. Family members slept in various rooms according to gender and age, with parents, children, and any servants occupying separate sleeping areas when the house size allowed. The sounds of the night in Istanbul included the calls of night watchmen, the occasional bark of dogs, and the lapping of water against the shores of the Bosphorus and Golden Horn.
Ships anchored in the harbor created additional sounds, with the creak of timbers and the voices of sailors carrying across the water. The darkness emphasized both the security of being inside one's home and the vulnerability of being part of a large city where dangers might lurk in shadows. The presence of the night watch provided some reassurance, though their effectiveness varied, and many residents simply stayed inside after dark rather than risk encounters with criminals or even the watch itself. Sleep eventually came to most residents of Istanbul as the night deepened, their bodies tired from the day's activities and ready for rest. Dreams during these sleeping hours might be interpreted as messages from God or glimpses of spiritual truths, with significant dreams sometimes prompting consultations with religious authorities or dream interpreters who claimed special knowledge of their meanings. The cycle of waking and sleeping, like the cycle of prayer times and the rhythm of commercial activity, represented one of the fundamental patterns that structured existence in Ottoman Istanbul. This simple, steady pattern of daily life in the great city that served as the heart of the Ottoman Empire was an ordinary reality for the people who called Istanbul their home.